I think quite honestly, the fitness industry and the sports performance industry has probably done a better job in looking at nutrition as it impacts it than we have in medicine. Medicine, we have really largely ignored it for the most part. During my training, I mean, we really never discuss nutrition in any real sense into how it might impact a particular disease. Now, we would say a malnourished person is higher risk for this or that, or we might say that, obesity is related to eating too much and therefore that's a problem, but no more specific than that. I mean, that was probably the whole entirety of my knowledge about nutrition leaving medical school.
So I just
Other
thought,
than,
like, when you do your nutrition consultations, do you have kind of like some kind of like carnivore-ish diet that you kind of start with, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think everybody needs to be on a meat-only diet. I don't want to come off saying that happens. That helps a lot of people. It's an elimination diet. It helps people solve problems. There's a lot of foods that impact our health, and I think figuring that out sometimes takes making things simplified. Many people thrive on a meat-only diet, so it's sometimes tapering people off of different, either whether it's carbohydrates or fiber or certain other types of food. We sometimes will do that. I tell people, most of the people that are reaching out to me from a health standpoint are trying to figure out a health problem. So I said, well, we need to do this in a logical fashion. So we eliminate, and then we kind of maintain for a while, and then we add back in.
One, two, three.
My name is Carl Powell.
I am Marco Casali.
I'm Lasse Rantala.
Carl Dial. I'm the
Escapist.
Hola, soy Marco Casali y ustedes están escuchando
To the Escapist Corner. Moro! Rantala Lasse tässä terve. Sä kuuntelet Escapist Corneria.
Yeah, so welcome to the Escapist Corner. Welcome to the Escapist Corner. We have a new amazing episode. For those who are not watching, we have an American guest today from Orange County, California. He is famous for bringing out, I would say, the one of the most controversial diets right now on the market. We have Dr. Shawn Baker on the show. Welcome, Shawn. And again, I'm very happy to have you today. I think we're going to have a pretty good discussion about actually your entire journey into this. So before we dive into all the carnivore stuff and so on, the thing that I would say is mostly interesting for me and that people probably neglect a lot is your background. So Shawn, where you're an MD, or you've been practicing medicine for many years. But first, before we start with that, where are you from originally?
So surprisingly, I don't know if this is a German podcast, but I actually was born in Germany. I was born in Hof, Germany, in Bavaria. My father was in the U.S. Air Force and military. There was a military base back in 1967, and so I've been able to visit that. When I was 30 years old, I got to go see Hof, so it was kind of interesting. But so that's where I was born. I grew up, then obviously moved back to the States when I was about one, and spent different times in different parts of the United States. Probably spent a lot of time in the Midwest, and then out to Texas, where I went to high school, college, and medical school. And then I kind of spent time in New Zealand, playing rugby down there at a fairly high level, and then come back to the United States. I entered the military. I had a break in my medical training. I went to college and medical school, and I decided to drop out of medical school, play rugby, which arguably was kind of a crazy situation, but I've always made sort of, different choices, I suppose. Did time in the military as a nuclear weapons launch officer. So I was one of the guys that would, basically blow up the world if it came to it. But unfortunately, that never eventuated. Played rugby for the military, the Armed Forces team. I continued to do that. Played for rugby for about 7 years till I was about 30, and then I got tired of getting my head kicked in, and maybe my brain damage wasn't complete because I'm still here. But
yeah.
Then I went back to medical school. The military paid for that, so I did a civilian medical school in Texas, and then did an orthopedic surgery residency for 5 years, also in Texas. Went back in the military, did some time in the Afghanistan war, taking care of lots of trauma. During that time, I was still an athlete. I went from rugby to powerlifting, where I set U.S. National records in the deadlift. I got up to 350 kilos as a drug-free athlete. And then I transitioned over to some of the strongman type stuff I did for a few years, competing at the national level at that. Drifted then into kind of the throwing, the Highland Games, which maybe, I don't know if in Wales, I know Scotland is where the Highland Games originate. I don't know if they do much of that in Wales, probably not as much, but you're probably familiar with it. So I put a kilt on and threw stuff, won a national championship, a world championship as a masters athlete. Did a little track and field where I was an All-American masters athlete in the discus, the heavyweight and superweight throw. Got into competitive indoor rowing on the Concept 2, where I leaned out, got down, dropped about 40, 50 pounds, and ended up setting 3 world records and 6 American records on that thing. And then currently I'm kind of transitioned into starting to do CrossFit now. It's kind of a new challenge. I'm 53 now, and I'm targeting the 55 age categories when I think I'll have sufficient. I won't suck so much at certain things where I can compete. So we'll see.
Yeah. We were also talking about who of us would beat you in rowing first.
Yeah, I think rowing, I'm pretty confident I could do pretty well. Now, if it came to handstand push-ups and walking on my hands and muscle-ups and some of the gymnastic stuff, I'm definitely not the best guy to plan on that stuff yet.
Yeah. I can say generally, I'm pretty confident on the rower too, but when I see the numbers you're pulling, I know it's a long way there. And I don't know, the most dreadful row I have to do is always the 1K. I don't know, that's the one that hurts the most. How's it for you?
I really haven't done very, my best 1K was 254. I did that, and that really wasn't much of a real effort for me. I think I can go sub 250 in that. I think I can get the 50 plus world record in that. But I just haven't done a lot of 1Ks. There was a little period of time where I kind of trained for it, and I was always more of a sprinter, and that was 500 meter and below, 500 meter, 1 minute, 100 meter. I really enjoy those. The 500 meters can be pretty painful at the end, obviously. But right now, I've been working on longer rows, sometimes as much as 20,000 meters at a time. And so I think I'm going to revisit the 1K probably in a few months and see if I can't just pop that world record out on that, and see how that goes. So
why not?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, sure. If I can do it, I'm going to do it. Yeah. It's funny. I continue, even as I get older, continue to see improvements in all things. Obviously the one nice thing about switching sports over CrossFit is you see rapid improvement where you were really horrible at something and that mentally is easier. When I got to rowing, particularly at 500 meter row, and I got, my best 500 meter was 1:14.5, and that was at age 50, and that's a pretty decent time. But then just to take 1/10 of a second off that requires an enormous amount of work and effort and time. Whereas to go from, doing a paltry amount of pull-ups to doing a lot of pull-ups takes a fraction of the time to do that. So it's fun from a psychological standpoint, it's fun to have a new sport where you can continue to see improvement, which I'm enjoying right now. But I'm still keeping rowing as a pretty decent staple. So I'm not going to give that up just yet.
Why did you gravitate towards the rowing in the first place?
Well, I'm built for it. I remember looking at the rowing machine maybe 20 years ago. Those Concept 2s have been around forever. I think I maybe rowed a little bit, and I kind of liked it. And then I just kind of got to where I was tired of chasing just strength all the time. I was probably 45, 46 years of age, and I'd still been just focusing on strong, explosive. And I hopped on a rower, and I just said, I'm going to pull foot, because I was kind of a little bit aware of CrossFit. I'd done some CrossFit stuff when I was in the military. Gosh, what was that, 2008, 2008 was the last time was it 2011? So maybe 10, 12 years ago. But I always look at CrossFit. Look, I'm not built for it. I'm too tall. I'm too heavy. I'm never going to be a CrossFit. You know, most guys that win CrossFit games are 5'9", 180 pounds, or what is that, 85 kilos or something like that. And I'm not that, and I've got too many weaknesses. But I saw the rowing machine. I said, well, I could get on the rowing machine. So I hopped on there, did a 500-meter row, and it was like, and I didn't know it at the time, but it was kind of a junky, beat up machine. It was not in a good condition, so it probably compromised. But I pulled like a 132 or 133, and it was pretty easy. And I said, well, I'm going to try it again. I came back the next day, I pulled a 125, 500-meter row. First time I did it, I said, well, this is interesting. Let me look up the records. And I started looking at the world records for my age group, and I saw that at that time it was 116. I'm like, that's only 9 seconds away. I could do that. So I started training for it. I got an Olympic gold medalist who lived near me that I just kind of found, and he kind of helped me with technique. And I just continued to train it. And long story short, I ended up breaking the records, and just found it. I enjoyed it. I found it. I really enjoyed the motion. I enjoyed the way it felt. I felt I had what it takes to be a sprint rower. I had the strength and the height. Because obviously being taller is a pretty significant advantage for that, as far as rowing goes. So it was, I've always sort of, kind of picked sports with the intention of being someone that could compete at a very high level, national champion, at least competing or competing for that. And so going into CrossFit for me is probably a sort of maybe it's a far-fetched type of thing, being, 6'5" with 39-inch sleeves. And, I've leaned out significantly to try to prevent the weight being a hamper, but I don't know. I'm still, the only thing I think is, as I'm older, I see what happens to older people is the competition gets smaller and smaller. There's not so many old guys. And so I don't know if I'll be able to, like I said, I'm gonna give myself 2 years to learn the skills, to get good at the skills, to see, I think I can get the fitness is not an issue. I don't think I can, fitness is just fitness. It's just pushing us doing the work, but having the skills, having the mechanical advantages, having the movement's done in an efficient manner is what's going to take time and effort, I think.
Yeah, sure.
I think I have a ton of questions when it comes to the CrossFit thing for sure. But I wanted to kind of go back a bit to the medical part of you and your story, because I heard some of your stories from when you were working. I think it was in Texas, where you were working at like a pediatric care for children.
Well, yeah, I worked at the Shrine Burn unit as part of my residency training. So when you start your surgical training, you kind of start out doing a general schedule where it was, vascular surgery, general surgery. We had, a few other. One of them was a pediatric burn center. So I was working at a pediatric. And this is one of the first things I did. I think it was the second month I was there, and so it was kind of like being thrown to the wolves from somebody fresh out of medical school, because you don't really know anything. Honestly, I mean, you've got a medical degree, but you know practically nothing. You're relying upon nurses and, other doctors that can kind of teach you. But the way that was set up was, it was a burn center. We had horrifically burned little children. I mean, these kids were 99% burned, total body surface area burns, kids that were doused in gasoline and, in Mexico and burned to pieces. And, the goal was to keep them alive, and we were constantly doing skin grafts on these kids, week after week after week, and hoping some of the skin would grow, and constantly fighting infection and keeping them fluid resuscitated, because they would just leach fluid. When you don't have skin, all your fluid leaches out. And so it's just a horrible situation, and it's painful, and it's not pleasant, and the kids are obviously suffering. And the place I was at, it was like, they treated all the children for free. Trying to burn center, which was very nice. I mean, everything was free, but there was no quitting. It was like, we will keep these kids alive no matter what. There's no pulling the plug. There's no euthanasia. There's no, end of life stuff. It's like they will be kept alive no matter what, unless they die. And it was just kind of a, for someone who didn't know anything about anything, and then you at night, literally at night when you took call, you were the only doctor, and you had 16 critically cared burnt kids in an ICU, and it was on you to keep them alive. The end of the night, they'd send them, okay, don't let any kids die. And you're like, I'm still learning how to do this stuff. So it was a very scary, humbling experience. Unfortunately, the nurses were so good, and they were just like, they would say, this patient has this going on. You'd like, well, what do you guys normally do in this situation? And they would tell you, we normally do this and this. Okay, do that. And that's how you learn. You just kind of finally figure it out. And then you just, fortunately, you try to keep the kids alive. And I was, fortunately, I never had a kid die on me, which was good. But I was only there for a month, I'm sure. We had children die. Yeah, we had children die while I was there, but none of them died like on my shift when I was like the guy that was in charge. And we literally were working. It was an exhausting experience because we would literally work for 40 hours straight, and then you would go home for about 6 hours to sleep, and then you come back and do another 40 hours straight. And you did that every single day, day for a month. And it was something like 130 hours a week of work, and something like 16 hours of sleep a week, something ridiculous.
I mean, it's this classical thing from medicine, right? It's and I heard this somewhere where this comes from. Like, why is medicine so hard, right? Why do you have to do like so many hours? You don't have sleep, and you make like all these bad calls because you're just fatigued, right? And what I understood this is based on, because one of the first leading doctors in the States, he was a drug addict, and he was smashing coke all the time, and he was like, constantly on drugs, and just wanted to, he was awake all the time, and he wrote like all these crazy rules and statements that, like, when you're what's it called when you're going when you're not stationary, but you're doing your I'm blanking on the word, but when the doctor starts, he has to
internship.
It's not, it's an internship, but you are basically living in a hospital. There's another word for that, but
residency.
There you go.
Yeah.
And he basically made up all these rules, and we are still living this, and it makes no simple sense to have doctors fatigued all the time and running on their teeth. And of course, you learn a lot. You learn how to handle stress and pressure and everything. But I'm also seeing like all these doctors, which we'll probably get into a bit later, is like all these doctors that have like so poor health. They're like, who are you to take care of anyone? You can barely take care of yourself anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the thought is, you deal with stress, you deal with sleep, because you never know what's going to happen. You should be able to function with minimal sleep and make the right decisions. And so, if you're trained for that, that's what's considered how they do it. Now, fortunately, they pass laws in the U.S. where it's like you can only work 80 hours in a week. But that's, a lot of that is still occurring. They get around that. People don't record their hours correctly. There's kind of a pressure. You could write that you work too many hours, but you may not make it through the program. I mean, there's all kinds of pressure on that. Yeah. It's gotten better than it was back when I did it, 20 some years ago. But it's still kind of a, maybe not the best environment. And there's people that say that the training is inferior now because they're not exposed to as much, because they're just not seeing. And the other thing was, you need to see as much as possible. So if you're always there at the hospital, always awake, always working, you're going to be exposed to more and more different things, different experiences, and then you'll know how to deal with those. But it's probably not the best system, quite honestly.
I mean, I'm just thinking the same situation as, okay, you want to be the best CrossFit athlete, right? Okay, are you going to do CrossFit workouts for 18 hours a day? Or is it better to have, a plan where you train towards some stuff and you have enough recovery so you can actually do this stuff? So I think the human psyche and everything works like that. You need to have this kind of the stress, and then you have to have the recovery always. But just shortly, why did you go to medicine to start with?
I think, well, I mean, when I was very young, I mean, even I can remember, it was sixth grade, which is, gosh, how old is that? I'm probably 12 years old. I was fascinated with science, and, I did that I really enjoyed it. And then I think somewhere, maybe by age 16, I decided I was going to be a physician. And so I started studying for the test, the medical college acceptance test at 16. So I was, I remember I was working at a restaurant. At some point I could study while, I was reading my book while I was working at a job where I could study and do that. And I just remember always wanting to do that. I did very well in school, did very well in the medical college acceptance test. And, that was my plan. And I just knew I wanted to do it and did it. I ended up choosing orthopedics just because it fits so well with what I was doing athletically. A lot of orthopedic surgeons have a very good knowledge of the musculoskeletal system, and obviously as an athlete, you get a pretty good knowledge of the musculoskeletal system. If you care about it, you should. And so those things went hand in hand for me. And I just, I guess from an early age, science and medicine was what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and then being, studying medicine, getting into or always being in this realm of fitness. When did you see, or when did you first time get the realization that nutrition is actually not is something that nobody knows particularly much about? Like if you look into sports, it's very weak, nutrition guidance, especially like just 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Same thing in medicine, I would say. So when did that realization come to you that, hey, there's something off with the nutrition guidance we are having?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think quite honestly, the fitness industry and the sports performance industry has probably done a better job in looking at nutrition as it impacts it than we have in medicine. Medicine, we have really largely ignored it for the most part. During my training, I mean, we really never discussed nutrition in any real sense into how it might impact a particular disease. Now, we would say a malnourished person is higher risk for this or that, or we might say that, obesity is related to eating too much, and therefore that's a problem, but no more specific than that. I mean, that was probably the whole entirety of my knowledge about nutrition leaving medical school, other than, what vitamins led to what deficiency states. But it wasn't until I personally started to realize that, I could not train any harder, as an athlete, and not fix my nutrition, because I up until that point, I mean, I didn't eat bad diet. I would eat what most people would say was a pretty average, quote unquote, healthy diet. Obviously I had some things that weren't healthy from time to time, but I wasn't living on junk food. I was eating, fairly quality ingredient diet. But despite that, at 42, 43, I started to develop these metabolic syndrome diseases, starting to see things catch up to me. Whereas, when I was in 20s, it didn't matter. I could just power through it. And, and I believed that as long as I trained hard, I could eat, I could have dessert and do whatever I wanted. And then I kind of went on my own personal journey and started reading about it. And then as I kind of got more and more comfortable about what was working for me, I started to sort of try to influence my patients, because I felt that, we have these people that are suffering from, and really the interest really was because as a surgeon, I was like, well, I can't replace your knee. I can't do your hip replacement until you lose weight. And whenever I told people to lose weight, they would never lose weight. They might lose a few pounds, and then they come back 3 months later and they've gained those pounds back. And at this point, they're crying in pain. And we ended up saying, okay, we'll do the surgery anyway. And the surgery was more difficult. It's harder to operate on obese people. Complication rates tend to be higher. The success rates tend to be lowered sometimes. And so, there was a big push we're going to try to minimize obesity. And so one of the things hospitals will do, or they did, mine did, they hired a bariatric surgeon to do gastric bypass surgery on patients so they would lose weight so then they could have another operation. So you have an operation so you could have another operation, which when you think about it, it's kind of crazy in that sense. But then as I discovered, a dietary pattern that worked for me, and at this time I was doing, basically more of a ketogenic diet. I started seeing patients that would do it, and the ones that would do it were often having very significant success with weight loss. But before they obtained weight loss, we were often seeing joint pain. The reason I was going to operate on them disappearing. And so it became very interesting. I was like, well, the reason we're going to do the operation is no longer there. Then we don't need to do the operation. And to me, that was good. But, that for a hospital, it's not so good, because the bottom line is they need the throughput. They need the procedures. They need the revenue from this stuff. That's why they're in business. And when you start to sort of mess with that business model, it sort of makes the administrators upset. And so I kind of, had my run-ins with the administration, and, ultimately it ended up me leaving that practice, and then leaving, the profession entirely, and reaching out into lifestyle and nutrition. And that's kind of where I am now. And so I've been spending the last few years mostly just helping people in lifestyle. And it's been far more rewarding for me, not necessarily financially, but from a just sense of doing the right thing. And that's where I'm at today.
Would you say you're probably helping more people at the moment than?
Yes. Without a doubt. I think not only just helping people with number of people I've been able to reach, but the overall impact has been much larger. I might be able to, have somebody with a sore shoulder and give them a cortisone injection and their shoulder stops hurting for 6 weeks. Great. But what I'm doing now is, it's lifelong impacting. It's changing people's entire lives. It's changing almost every single component of their health, whether it's depression, whether it's chronic pain, whether it's gastrointestinal problems, whether it's, joint pain, whether it's, mental health issues, autoimmune diseases, so on and so forth, skin issues. These things are all getting better with just simple, lifestyle interventions, which I think is how we should be treating the vast majority of it. This should be the frontline treatment on everything, almost everything.
So actually that comes to a point I had, which I think is really important, because I think people disregard nutrition as a way to improve like anxiety or anything along those lines. So can you touch on why you think it is that nutrition can be so impactful in terms of anxiety and the other things you mentioned?
Yeah. So what I see reliably with people that, change diet, at least the diet that I'm certainly helping people with, is that joint pain, digestive issues, and mental health issues get better. And I think one of the reasons we see them get it's because those are very common issues. And so common things, you're just seeing more of them. But I think what we are seeing more and more is, mental health disorders. Clearly, it's physiologic. It's not like the brain is some magic organ that doesn't respond to the physiology and the environmental inputs like the liver and the muscles and bones and kidneys do. It's an organ that's exposed to blood. It's exposed to things we ingest, things we inhale, things that impact us. And so when we realize that, we say, well, what is the physiology that's going on in the brain? And it's very, very complicated. I'm not going to pretend it's some simple thing, but we do know that there does seem to be a relationship with gut health and brain health. And so diet does impact gut health. We also see that brain seems to respond to metabolism. Brain metabolism is also responsive, and that is dependent upon nutrition as well. And so we have those two big things. And so what I see is a lot of people that have GI issues, gastrointestinal problems. Sometimes they have permeability issues where there's too much stuff getting past the gut barrier and causing inflammation throughout different membranes, causing permeability in membranes. We have a blood-brain barrier that becomes leaky when our gut is leaky. We have all kinds of different membranes that sort of no longer function as they're designed. And so that probably has an impact on brain physiology and therefore brain function and mood and mental health. And then so does, I think, stability of energy. And so when we see people that are on a very unstable energy diet, and this can be a diet where you're constantly snacking and having these wild fluctuations in glucose where it's up and down and up and down, I think that leads to lability of mood, where the mood is like that. We see the same thing where mood follows energy. And I think we see that when we flatten that out, with a diet where glucose is more stabilized, we see a bit more stabilization in mood. And so I think those are probably the two. And then the other thing is, I think just better nutrition. I think brain health, just like anything, it responds to nutrition. Like our muscles require nutrition, our brain does too. I think there's compounds that, we are deficient in, whether it's certain minerals, certain vitamins, certain, other compounds. When we're deficient in that, our brain just doesn't function as well.
Going into if we look at this from like the lenses of CrossFit, for me, before CrossFit, I was playing ice hockey and stuff like that, and we had more or less no nutritional guidance there, right? It was like, you should carb load with a lot of pasta and that kind of stuff. But then starting with CrossFit, also, I really didn't have any interest in nutrition at all. But then, you started to get more interested into it and so on. And now, like we've also did this transition within our, box here or in this CrossFit realm, is that we're pivoting more into the health part of taking care of people. And the base of CrossFit philosophy is nutrition, right? So you should fix your nutrition. That's the first thing to fix, but it's not always like the first one you start with. Of course, like for guys, it's usually like, you want to get a six pack or more muscle, you would want to pull more weight, and then you get interested into the nutrition. And for women, it might be, they want to lose a couple of pounds. So that's their motivation. And then they might start to get into nutrition. But I think that there's still like a big barrier to get to people's head we need to fix this bigger, vaster problem, which is the nutrition industry, I would say. Where we are looking at, just in the US, 80% of all hospital bills are paid by, or 84%, sorry, are paid because of chronic illness, right? So it's diabetes and all this stuff caused by overweight and everything. So we could save trillions of dollars just by, getting our food shit together, right? So what has been the most, I know you're sharing a lot of like good stories about success stories about people and so on, but is there anything particular that you feel like is that resonates the most within people, so they actually want to listen, that they want to change? Because you've been there with these people that want to, have a knee surgery and everything, and they actually need a lifestyle change. How do we reach those guys?
I think you touched on a very important point. I have said the healthcare system itself is sick, at least in the U.S. And I think in Europe, there's probably some better practices in Europe, depending. We spend a lot of money here in this country, something like $3.5 trillion a year. And most of that is, as you correctly pointed out, is to pay for the management and maintenance, quite honestly. We're maintaining chronic disease. We're not really curing or getting people off. It's just they get plugged into the system where it's a never-ending stream of pharmaceuticals and other pills and procedures. And so we have to get away from that. It's not sustainable. Unhealthy people are not environmentally sustainable. The healthcare system is an environmental drain. So I think what CrossFit is doing, and I know Greg Glassman has sort of stepped up to CrossFit Health, and he's really taking an interest in that. In fact, I might have an opportunity to meet with Greg in the near future. I know the director of the CrossFit Health part, and so we're going to maybe hopefully meet up. But I think that the thing that really resonates with people who works are success stories. This has been what I've found, because most people can relate to another person and see the struggle they've had. And that impacts them more than anything else, more than a study, more than, there's a lot of money is paid in these studies, and everybody's arguing about what's the best diet. But honestly, people get bored with that stuff. They'll read a study and they'll talk about it. A few of the intellectuals will argue this and that. But what actually makes a person that needs to change their lifestyle change is generally powerful, stories. These are the things that move. I mean, think of the things that made these huge changes in the world. You look at World War I, where we had, was it the Duke from, I can't remember if he was from Sarajevo or whatever, was shot. And that story, these stories, these one little incidents incite this big change. And so somebody's got a story out there that will influence thousands, if not millions of people. And, once you reach a certain threshold, I mean, CrossFit, is now a $5 billion a year industry. I mean, and this is, this came from, basically a few guys doing some stuff and got in shape, and I was like, this looks pretty cool, and it grows, and that's how we see this spontaneous growth. And so I think the nutrition movement can be the same way. Now, the problem is you have a lot of vested interests that don't want to see that happen. You have a lot of people that make a lot of money selling us junk food. They make a lot of money selling us, pharmaceuticals. And so these are, multi-trillion-dollar industries that, they're not going to let go easy. They like the business model. It works pretty well. You get these people hooked on this junk, and they're lifelong customers. And so, you got a lot of pushback and fight, but I think there's a tipping point. If you can reach a certain percentage of the population, and then they stand up, this becomes the problem. You do the right thing, and you're attacked by the vested interests. You see it in the CrossFit community. You get marginalized. Oh, look at those crazy CrossFit people. They're a bunch of cultists. And while I see where some of that, where you can make that argument to some degree, but I've always thought that, look, these people are getting in shape. These people are doing things, they're making a positive impact. How can that not be good? I mean, obviously you can always adjust and improve things, but my goodness, you take that relative to the standard person, the average person who is sedentary, who is, just not happy. I mean, I would say the majority of those folks are not particularly happy. And I think that's ultimately what we want to do in life. We want to feel good. We want to, and I think performance, being free of pain, being functional, in my view, is leads to happiness.
We always forget that inside our walls here. Like we meet all our members and we see how good they are, right? So they can do this, they can do that, they can do snatches, they can do pull-ups, they can do hundreds of pull-ups and push-ups and whatever. And then a member comes to us and says like, oh man, I feel so bad because I couldn't reach the 10th round of 20 pull-ups, and we're like, oh yeah, we can get you to 15 rounds maybe if we do this. And then like, wait a minute, what are we talking about here? Like, if we look outside the window here where people are passing, we can sit here all week and we can wait here for 1 week and nobody will pass here that is fitter than you. So the standard or the average Joe out there is so far behind what we're doing. And we're kind of in this, I would say, in this super awesome positive environment where we only meet people that are improving. They're getting more and more, into diet, into nutrition, and we forget very fast like how bad it is outside. So we have these big windows here so we can actually see the street and look at the people that are passing all the time. So it's sometimes we kind of have to pinch ourselves and say like, wait, slow down. We are 15 rounds is not like the thing we're really looking at here. We're looking at that we are actually just we're improving, but we don't have to stress about, we're gonna reach that 10th round, I promise, but like we don't have to stress it. We're already doing such a good job, and especially like you as a member. But what I was let's get into the more of the diet then. So you went from the ketogenic diet, and then you landed in this carnivore diet, from which you also read. You wrote a book about the carnivore diet. And how did that happen? How did you get to that?
Yeah, I mean, it was purely my decision to do the diet was purely based on performance. I was on a ketogenic diet. I noticed some improvements, particularly as I was approaching 50 years of age, and I've been training my whole life as an athlete. You have aches and pains and things that are sore, and I saw with the ketogenic diet that sorted to help. I saw my performance was pretty solid overall. I didn't really lose a lot of performance on the diet. I mean, I've been lean. I'd lost weight. So there's a little bit of impact going from, 280 pounds or, that was 125, 128 kilos to 110 kilos. You lose a little bit of strength with that. But I just kind of was continuing to read about this nutrition, and I just kind of stumbled across a group of people that were doing this all meat diet. And I thought, when I first saw it, I said, well, that sounds pretty weird, pretty crazy. And I just kind of kept reading their success stories. And just like I said, success stories sort of compel this. And I saw some people that were doing really, really, really good. And I started reading back into the history of societies and different athletes that had used meat-based diets for performance. And I thought, well, why not just try it? So I experimented. I would do 3 days of, basically steak and eggs. And I felt pretty good. And then I would reload with, some other foods. And then I went a week, and then I went 2 weeks, and then I went 30 days. And the whole time I felt generally pretty good. And then, after 30 days, doing this, been on social media and kind of joking about how I was going to die of scurvy because I didn't have, enough vitamin C or heart disease because of all the saturated fat. None of that, of course, happened. And then I went back to my regular diet, and I just honestly didn't feel as good. I mean, I just was like, I don't feel as good as I do on just a meat-based diet. So I said, well, I'm just going to keep eating meat for now and see how I do. And then I went to 2 months, and eventually went to 6 months. And then at that time, I started to notice my athletic performance was really starting to pick up quite a bit. And this is not like a new person that's never trained. I've been literally training for, at that time, something like 37 years. So I've been putting in the time and effort. And I legitimately saw about an 8% improvement in my strength and my rowing performance when I calculated wattage, which is a very significant improvement for somebody who was already at a American record level, on a rowing machine. And so within 6 months, again, world record after world record. I mean, I went literally 500 meter world record like 10 times in 2 weeks. I mean, I just did it day after day after day after day. And my recovery was excellent. I was able to train every single day at a high intensity without being sore. It was kind of remarkable. And I saw improvements in strength. And so I just continued doing it. And then, I've just kind of continued to push it. And then, my experiences, I was fairly public on it, inspired a lot of other people to do it. And so a lot of people saw similarly what I saw. They saw improvements in health markers. They saw improvements in body composition. Many of them saw improvements in athletic performance, better recovery, same thing I was seeing for all kinds of different sports. And so now I am, 3.5 years have been doing this diet, and, I continue to thrive, and none of the sort of the bad things that I was told was going to happen have happened. So it's curious to me.
So what would you say to, physician, like a medical doctor? So I know plenty of them, and I think half of my neighbors are medical doctors, and I like to talk about diet and nutrition with them, and they're not always that super interested in it, strangely enough. But what would you say to like a medical doctor who would say like, oh, that's not good, like that could be dangerous for a patient?
Well, I mean, I would say, well, let's see what the results are. Why don't we challenge that because we don't know. I mean, there's fortunately a study in progress right now on that what Harvard University is doing. But I mean, we've got a very few studies on a fully meat-based diet in the literature. All of those studies show good outcomes. I mean, every single one of them. I mean, if we go back to the 28 studies, the 5 or 6 peer-reviewed studies that Vilmar Stefansson did back in 1928, where they had the top leading researchers of the day, predicting the same thing. Oh, bad things are going to happen. They do the study and nothing bad happened. In fact, the outcomes were very good. And then there's, scattered case reports throughout the literature, which all show good outcomes. So there's no real evidence on this diet. Now people will conflate a standard American diet, a junk food diet. And they'll say, well, the average American eats more meat and they eat a lot of sugar and junk food. And when you actually analyze the American diet, there's very little meat, particularly red meat, in the diet. Beef is only something like 2 ounces a day, which is an abysmally small amount. The vast majority of the American diet is plant-based. It's something like 75% plant-based. Now, much of that is sugar. Much of that is refined grain. Much of it is oil, seed oils and things like that. So that's all, I would argue, not very good, but it's clearly not a meat-based diet. And so what I'm saying is, if we take people that are, that have diabetes, that are obese, that have visceral fat, that have high inflammation markers, maybe have chronic gastrointestinal issues, mental health issues, and they go from that situation to they're leaner, they've lost body fat, their blood glucose is stabilized, they're no longer in a diabetic range, their inflammation markers go away, their gut function's better, the joints stop hurting, and mental health is normal. How is that possibly bad? I just, because this, this assumes, the assumption is we can look at nutrition studies and predict the future and say, this diet's going to lead to heart disease and cancer, when in fact, no studies have ever been done, will ever be done, can ever be done that can support the causality on that, because you just can't do the proper studies. So you do these really, really weak, poor associative studies called epidemiologic studies to try to make those logical leaps, and it's just bad data. And so I would rather say, if I can take somebody who's sick and make them healthy by almost every objective and subjective standard, then by definition that has helped that person and has not hurt that person.
I think we, just to kind of explain to the audience, because I think we're so deep into the nutrition trenches ourselves, so we are very aware of where this comes from and everything, but where the bad mouthing comes from when it comes to meat, for example, it is these very weak studies, as you say. And I don't know if it would be fair, but this is my interpretation of it. So maybe you can correct me, guys, if I'm wrong. But it is basically me going out here on the street, asking people, what did you eat the last 50 years? Tell me now. And then they're going to just, make up whatever they ate. And then from that, I'm going to try to conclude that, I see most of these people that they have some kind of sickness now, so they ate meat. But in my questions, I never asked them if they smoked. I never asked them if they had a sedentary job. I didn't ask them how much cereals they were eating, maybe. So there's a lot of things that we are not seeing in those studies. And is that a fair description of those?
Well, I think they do in some of the studies try to confound for some of those variables: smoking, drinking, obesity. But the honest question is, it's really, really difficult to remember what you ate for the last 6 months. In fact, when they validate those studies as food frequency questionnaires, invariably people get things so wrong, they can't remember what they ate. And so you've got really bad data. We don't know, we really have no idea what these people are eating. They're kind of guessing and maybe, and a lot of times they overestimate how many fruits and vegetables they eat because they think that's the right thing to say. And they underestimate some of the other things. And so we get really poor data. And then when we get that data and then we ask them, we try to extrapolate that over 20 years, people's diets change over 20 years tremendously often. They go from one diet to the next, and for some time they're eating a lot of this and sometimes they're eating a lot of that. So it varies significantly. And then the other thing is, then the sort of associations come out, and the relative, risk of something is well, there's a 20% difference, which is meaningless when we look at nutritional epidemiology. We really need to see, at bare minimum, a 200% difference. And many people will want to see a 500% difference before you can ever start to talk about causality. And it's almost never that those studies reach those critical thresholds. And so you just have a bunch of wasted time and money on this stuff. And so this is, like I said, we need to focus on the here and now. I mean, if somebody comes into CrossFit and they're morbidly obese or they're 100 pounds overweight, and they start exercising, they clean up their diet, and they lose the weight, and they get in shape, you have helped that person. I don't care what their diet was. I mean, it's, we got to look at the endpoints that really matter to people and look at what's going on today.
We talked about this today, Mark, is how, just looking at people's diet and this kind of, how honest are you toward yourself, right? So we see this when we're coaching nutrition clients and so on, that they're also self-deceiving, right, with their diet.
Sure.
And so put that into the picture of now that person he can't even estimate what he ate last week because he's kind of dreaming up the numbers and everything. Now, let's try to get this guy to talk about like his last year or 6 months or whatever it might be. And I think this is like the lesson to the audience here is like, take your pen and paper now and write down what you ate the last 6 months. Can you do it? Yes or no? And like from Monday to Sunday, exactly how many grams and how much did you sleep and how much did you exercise and everything. And yeah, that's your homework, guys, listening. But yeah, so that's basically where this kind of thing comes from, that meat might be dangerous for you. But yeah, how would we approach to put meat back into the diet, if we say that? How do we mix that into a normal diet, we say?
Yeah, so like that question came to my mind because in Germany it's quite a wild concept. Even though they love meat, it's wild to think about just eating meat solely. That just doesn't make sense, and that won't resonate with anyone. So I just thought, like, when you do your nutrition consultations, you have kind of like some kind of like carnivore-ish diet that you kind of start with, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think everybody needs to be on a meat-only diet. I don't want to come off saying that happens. That helps a lot of people. It's an elimination diet. It helps people solve problems. There's a lot of foods that impact our health, and I think figuring that out sometimes takes making things simplified. Many people thrive on a meat-only diet. So it's sometimes tapering people off of different, whether it's carbohydrates or fiber or certain other types of food. We sometimes will do that. I tell people, most of the people that are reaching out to me from a health standpoint are trying to figure out a health problem. So I said, well, we need to do this in a logical fashion. So we eliminate, and then we kind of maintain for a while, and then we add back in. And what you can add back in is probably less than you're currently eating. And so that's how I approach that. Now, from an athlete standpoint, many athletes, will find that putting meat in the diet, particularly a lot of meat, is very, very beneficial to performance, to recovery, to building muscle, to strength to weight ratios. I mean, being lean and strong is obviously never a bad thing, particularly in CrossFit or really almost any sport. There's very few sports, super heavyweight powerlifting, maybe sumo wrestlers, where you just need to be big as possible. But, I think that, and then we talk about carbohydrates. I don't view carbohydrates necessarily as a bad thing. I view that some of the things they're wrapped in, some of the things they're packaged with, can be problematic for certain people. And that could include things like vegetables and fruits. I know that's sort of crazy to talk about, but there are some people, like, we know for a fact if you eat too much spinach, people eating these spinach smoothies can cause nephritis. It can cause, the oxalates can cause damage to the kidney. So there's other things that occur. There's people that don't tolerate glutens well. There's people that don't tolerate lectins well. It just depends on the individual. And so if you're having this chronic rash you can't figure out, or this mental health issue you can't figure it out, why not eliminate things, figure it out, and then put it back in? I will tell you that meat is a very safe food. It's probably one of the safest foods out there from an irritation, sensitivity standpoint.
Yeah, you were touching this a bit with when it comes to healthcare, is the environmental part of it, of sickness. how about the environmental part of meat and meat production?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I have to leave in 1 minute, so I'll see if I can bring the wrap that up. I think that the impact of meat on the environment is far overstated relative to what really things impact the environment. I mean, I've got at my website meatrx.com, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles and data and information and scientific studies that would counter what we see about meat being the most harmful thing. There's a plant-based agenda where they want to tell you that not eating meat is going to save the environment. That's not true at all. That's not going to make any significant difference. Now, are there ways we can better manage and raise our animals? Yes, I think that's fair to say. But to say that giving up all meat is the only thing or the best thing we can do for the planet is just ridiculous. And there's so much information to counter that. Guys, unfortunately, I have to leave to do a consultation. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I'm
No worries. Not
glad
a
for
pleasure.
you for time. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thanks, guys.